She stood alone at her mother's graveside while they laughed behind her back. Her husband didn't hold her hand. His family didn't offer condolences. Instead, they whispered about what a burden she'd always been, what a mistake he'd made marrying her. But in the lawyer's briefcase, just 20 feet away, was a document that would change everything. And none of them had any idea. This is the true story of how one woman's darkest day became her greatest vindication, and how the people who humiliated her would soon be begging for mercy. Over the next hour and 40 minutes, you're going to witness a story that seems too unbelievable to be true, but every word of it happened. 3 questions will drive this narrative forward. First, how could a family be so cruel at a funeral, mocking a grieving daughter while she buried the woman who gave her life? Second, what was hidden in that inheritance that nobody knew about, not even the daughter herself? And third, what happens when the powerless suddenly hold all the cards? I'm going to tell you about Sarah Mitchell, a 52-year-old woman who spent 28 years being treated like she was worthless. For nearly 3 decades, she endured mockery, contempt, and casual cruelty from her husband's family. She asked permission to spend her own money. She apologized for existing. She made herself smaller and smaller, hoping that one day they might finally accept her. That day never came, but another day did. The day she buried her mother, Eleanor Chen. The day everything changed. But before we get to that moment, you need to understand how Sarah got here. Before we go any deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Sarah Mitchell was born Sarah Chen in 1972 in Sacramento, California. She was the only child of Eleanor and Thomas Chen, immigrants who arrived in America from Taiwan in 1968 with 2 suitcases, $400, and impossible dreams. Thomas worked 2 jobs from the moment they landed. During the day, he was a janitor at an office building downtown. On weekends, he did landscaping for wealthy families who never learned his name. Eleanor cleaned houses 6 days a week, starting at 5 in the morning and finishing after dark. At night, she took in sewing and alterations, working by lamplight while Thomas slept. They lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots weren't uncommon. Sarah grew up watching her parents sacrifice everything. She saw her father come home with hands raw from chemicals. She saw her mother's fingers bleed from needle pricks, saw her fall asleep at the sewing machine. What Sarah didn't know was that her mother was playing a different game entirely. Eleanor Chen wasn't just surviving. She was building something. Every dollar that didn't go to rent or food, Eleanor saved. Not in a bank account where it might be noticed, but in cash, hidden in places Sarah never thought to look. And when she had enough, Eleanor would disappear for an afternoon. She'd come back with paperwork she'd keep in a locked filing cabinet. Sometimes Thomas would ask what she was doing. Eleanor would smile and say she was making sure their daughter would never have to work as hard as they did. Thomas trusted her. He had no idea his wife was becoming a real estate investor. In 1983, Eleanor bought her first property, a small duplex in a rough part of Sacramento. She paid $18,000 in cash. The seller was so surprised by a Chinese woman showing up with an envelope full of $100 bills that he almost didn't take the deal. But Eleanor was patient, and when he finally agreed, she became a landlord. She managed that property herself, collected the rent in person, fixed what she could fix. And every month after expenses, she'd clear about $300 in profit. $300 that went right back into the next property, back into the plan. By 1987, she owned 4 properties. By 1992, she owned 9. And she did all of this while still cleaning houses, still taking in sewing, still living in that same 1-bedroom apartment. Sarah had no idea. She thought her mother was barely scraping by. When she got her first job at 16, working at a grocery store after school, she gave half her paycheck to her mother to help with bills. Eleanor took the money with tears in her eyes and put it in a savings account for Sarah's college fund. Sarah went to community college because she didn't want to burden her parents. She got a degree in medical administration and started working as a receptionist at a doctor's office. She was 22 years old, living at home, saving money and dreaming of a life that felt bigger. That's when she met David Morrison. It was 1996. Sarah's medical office sent her to a training seminar. David Morrison sat 2 rows behind her. He was 28, 6 years older than Sarah. He worked in medical device sales, made good money, drove a nice car. He was tall, confident, had the kind of smile that made you think he was genuinely interested. During the lunch break on the first day, he approached Sarah, asked if she wanted to grab a coffee. They talked for an hour. He seemed fascinated by her parents' immigration story. He told her about his family, how they'd lived in Sacramento for generations, how his mother was very involved in local society. Sarah was charmed. For the first time in her life, a man who seemed to have everything was paying attention to her. They dated for 6 months. David was attentive in ways Sarah had never experienced. He sent flowers to her office. He planned thoughtful dates. David proposed on their 6-month anniversary. The ring was beautiful. When he asked her to marry him, she cried. She said yes without hesitation. Her parents were cautious. Thomas asked questions about David's family, about his intentions. Eleanor was quieter, more watchful. After meeting David the second time, Eleanor pulled Sarah aside. She asked if Sarah was truly happy if David treated her with respect. Sarah laughed. Of course he did. Eleanor didn't push. She simply said that if Sarah ever needed anything, she should call. She also made Sarah promise to always keep something for herself. Money, savings, something that's yours alone, just in case. Sarah promised, not understanding why it mattered. The wedding was the following spring. David wanted a large wedding at his family's country club. Sarah wanted something smaller. They compromised on a hotel ballroom. Sarah's side of the room had maybe 30 people. David's side had over 100 guests. Country club members, business associates, family friends, women in designer dresses, men in custom suits. Sarah felt out of place at her own wedding. David's mother, Patricia Morrison, made sure Sarah knew it. During the receiving line, Patricia looked Sarah up and down and said, "Well, isn't this quaint?" When Eleanor gave a toast in accented English, Patricia whispered loud enough for people nearby to hear, "I hope David knows what he's gotten himself into." David's sister Jennifer cornered Sarah in the bathroom during the reception, looked at Sarah's wedding dress, bought off the rack at a department store, and said, "You know, I have a friend who does alterations. She could have made this look less cheap." Sarah stood there, stunned. This was her wedding day, and already they were making it clear she didn't belong. The first year of marriage was an education. Sarah learned that David's version of sharing a life meant her adapting to his. They moved into a house David's parents helped buy. David suggested they combine bank accounts. Sarah agreed. Her paycheck started going into their joint account. David handled everything. Within a year, Sarah was asking David for permission to buy things. David would give her an allowance like she was a child. And Sarah, who'd been raised to be respectful, to not cause trouble, learned to make herself smaller, learned to ask for less, learned to be grateful for whatever she was given. 28 years is long enough to forget who you used to be. Sarah spent 28 years in a marriage where she was needed but not valued, where she was useful but not respected, where she was tolerated but never truly accepted. And David's family made sure she understood her place every single day. The Morrison family gatherings were exercises in humiliation. Every holiday happened at Patricia's house. Sarah would arrive early. Patricia would hand her an apron without saying hello, point her toward the kitchen. Sarah would spend hours cooking, cleaning, preparing. Patricia would sit in the living room with her friends, drinking wine, complaining about how difficult it was to find good household help. When dinner was served, Sarah would be the last to sit down. Sometimes Patricia would forget to set a place for her. Patricia would act surprised. "Oh, I'm so sorry, dear, I didn't realize you'd be joining us," as if Sarah wasn't part of the family. Once during Christmas dinner, Sarah mentioned an article she'd read about healthcare reform. Patricia looked at her and said, "Darling, we're trying to have a pleasant meal. Let's not discuss your little job." The table laughed. David smiled. Sarah didn't speak for the rest of the evening. Jennifer was particularly cruel. She had a talent for finding Sarah's vulnerabilities. Comments about Sarah's weight, about her clothes, about the fact that she and David didn't have children. Each comment was delivered with a smile disguised as concern, but Sarah knew better. These were calculated attacks designed to keep her in her place. David's role in all of this was the most painful part. He never defended her, not once in 28 years. When Patricia called Sarah the help, David laughed. When Jennifer made jokes about Sarah's thrift store clothes, David agreed they were pretty bad. When Craig suggested Sarah was only with David for his money, David would shrug and say she's not clever enough to be a gold digger, and Sarah would apologize. She'd say she was sorry for being too sensitive. The financial control David exercised was suffocating. Sarah worked full-time for 28 years. Every paycheck went into their joint account. David gave her an allowance for groceries and personal expenses, $50 a week. If she needed more, she had to ask, had to justify every purchase. Sarah learned to shop at thrift stores, to clip coupons, not because they were poor, but because asking David for money was humiliating. Her parents saw what was happening. Eleanor would watch her daughter with sad eyes but say nothing. Every time Sarah visited, Eleanor would slip her an envelope, cash, sometimes $50, sometimes $100. She'd say, "This is for you, just for you, don't tell David." Sarah would protest. Her mother barely had anything, but Eleanor would insist. What Sarah didn't know was that those envelopes represented a tiny fraction of what Eleanor actually had. By 2010, Eleanor owned 18 properties worth over $30 million. By 2020, she owned 23 properties and her net worth had climbed to $47 million, all while living in a modest house, driving an old car, clipping coupons. Eleanor was building something for Sarah, for the day when Sarah would need it. Thomas Chen died in 2015. Heart attack. Sudden. Eleanor buried him with money she'd been saving for exactly that purpose. At the funeral, David's family didn't come. They sent flowers. Sarah was devastated not just by her father's death but by the complete lack of care from David's family. David came but left early. That night, Eleanor told Sarah she needed to update her will. She met with Robert Chang and made sure every asset was documented and assigned to Sarah. She didn't tell Sarah the full extent of what she owned. Sarah assumed her mother maybe had a small savings account. She had no idea. In early 2024, Eleanor was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The oncologist was blunt. 6 months, maybe less. Eleanor chose aggressive treatment, not to save herself, but because she wanted as much time as possible with her daughter. Sarah threw herself into caretaking, drove Eleanor to every appointment, sat with her through every chemo session, slept beside her hospital bed during the bad nights. David hated it. He said Sarah was neglecting him. Patricia called Sarah selfish. Jennifer posted on social media about how difficult it must be for David. Sarah didn't care. For the first time in 28 years, she truly didn't care what the Morrisons thought. Her mother was dying. Nothing else mattered. Eleanor fought for 7 months. But in late September, it became clear she was losing the battle. Eleanor made the decision to stop treatment. She came home. Sarah moved in, spent every moment beside her mother. One night, Eleanor asked Sarah about her marriage, asked if she was happy. Sarah lied, said yes, of course. Eleanor looked at her, really looked at her, said, "You don't have to pretend with me. I know what that family is like. I've always known." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She said, "I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to leave." Eleanor took her hand, said, "You'll know when the time comes. You're stronger than you think. Trust yourself." Eleanor continued. She said, "I've taken care of some things. After I'm gone, you'll understand. You'll have choices, real choices. Promise me you'll make the right ones." Sarah promised, still not understanding. Eleanor died on October 3, 2024. It was early morning. Sarah was beside her, holding her hand. Eleanor's last words were barely a whisper. She said, "You're stronger than you know. Remember that." And then she was gone. That night, Sarah went home to David. He was watching television. Didn't look up when she came in. She said, "She's gone. My mom died this morning." David said, "Okay. Are you going to make dinner or should I order something?" Sarah stared at him. This was her husband, the man she'd spent 28 years trying to please, and he couldn't even look at her when she told him her mother had died. She went to the guest bedroom, closed the door, and cried until she couldn't cry anymore. Sarah planned her mother's funeral alone. David didn't help. Patricia called once, asked if Sarah needed help. Sarah said yes. Patricia said she'd send the name of the funeral home they use. Sarah called, got a quote, $25,000. She didn't have that, called a different funeral home, a smaller one. The quote was $4,500, still more than Sarah had. She'd been hiding the cash her mother had given her over the years, had almost $3,000 saved. She did something she'd never done before. She applied for a credit card in her own name. Not a joint card, her own card. The approval came 3 days later, a credit limit of $5,000. Sarah stared at the email. This was hers, this card, this money, this decision. For the first time in 28 years, she had the power to make a choice without asking permission. She used the card to pay for the funeral, chose a simple casket, white roses, a small service. Burial at Oak Hill Cemetery next to her father, nothing fancy. The kind of service Eleanor would have wanted. David's family made it clear they considered this an inconvenience. Patricia called, said she wanted to make sure Sarah had chosen an appropriate venue. Sarah said it was at Peaceful Valley Funeral Home. Patricia was silent, then said, "I've never heard of that one." "Well, I'm sure it's fine. Try to keep the service brief. We have other commitments," Jennifer texted. Said she'd try to come but had a hair appointment so she might be late. David complained about the timing. The day before the funeral, Sarah went to see her mother one last time. Eleanor looked peaceful, small. Sarah stood there and made a promise. She said, "I'm sorry I didn't understand what you were trying to tell me, but I promise you, Mom, after tomorrow, things are going to change." October 9, 2024. The sky over Sacramento was gray. Heavy clouds threatened rain. Sarah woke at 5, couldn't sleep. Today was the day she'd bury her mother. She got dressed carefully, a simple black dress. David was still asleep. She didn't wake him, drove to Oak Hill Cemetery as the sun came up. The cemetery was beautiful, old oak trees, granite headstones. Sarah found her mother's plot, next to her father's. The grave had already been dug. Sarah stood there for a long time, thinking about her parents, about their journey, about everything they'd sacrificed. She wondered if they'd be proud of her. She thought her mother had wanted more for her, had wanted Sarah to be brave enough to choose herself. Sarah wasn't sure she knew how, but standing there she decided she'd try. She left at 7, drove to the funeral home. The staff was preparing. Sarah stayed, greeted guests as they arrived. Her mother's friends came early. People from the Taiwanese community center. They hugged Sarah, told her stories about Eleanor's kindness, her generosity. One woman, Mrs. Lin, told about a time Eleanor had shown up with groceries and cash, had said, "Pay it forward when you can." Sarah cried listening. Linda Torres arrived at 9:30. Linda had been Eleanor's friend for 40 years. She hugged Sarah tight, said, "Your mother was so proud of you. Eleanor used to say someday you'd realize how strong you are." David arrived at 9:55, 5 minutes before the service. He came alone. He walked in and immediately pulled out his phone, didn't look at Sarah, didn't ask how she was doing, just found a seat and started scrolling. Sarah felt something shift inside her. This was her mother's funeral, the most painful day of her life, and her husband couldn't be bothered to look at her. She spent 28 years making excuses for him. But watching him ignore her on the day she buried her mother, Sarah saw the truth. He didn't love her. Maybe he never had. The realization felt almost like relief. At 10:15, Patricia, Jennifer, and Craig arrived, 20 minutes late. Patricia wore designer sunglasses indoors. Jennifer was on her phone. Craig looked bored. They walked past Sarah without speaking. Patricia air-kissed David. Jennifer asked loud enough for people nearby to hear, "Do we have to stay for the whole thing?" David shrugged, probably, tried to look sad. They laughed. Sarah was standing 10 feet away. She heard every word. So did Linda Torres. The pastor, Reverend Hayes, spoke beautifully, talked about Eleanor's journey from Taiwan, her courage, her dedication, her generosity. He told stories about how Eleanor had helped people, about her philosophy of paying kindness forward. Sarah sat in the front row, crying quietly. Behind her, she could hear Patricia whispering, dismissive, impatient. Several of Eleanor's friends shared memories. Sarah tried to speak but couldn't. The grief was too big. The service lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, everyone proceeded to the graveside. Sarah rode in the car behind the hearse. Alone, David rode separately. The graveside was under an old oak tree, beautiful, peaceful. The funeral director placed the casket over the grave, arranged the flowers. Reverend Hayes said a final prayer. Linda Torres stepped forward, talked about 40 years of friendship, about Eleanor's love for her daughter, about how Eleanor had always believed Sarah was destined for great things. Several others spoke. Then it was done. The staff began lowering the casket. Sarah watched her mother descend into the earth. People started to leave, offering final condolences. These people had shown her more kindness in one day than David's family had in 28 years. And that's when she heard them, David's family, 20 feet away, talking amongst themselves. Linda Torres was close enough to hear every word. Patricia spoke first. She said, "I cannot believe we had to stand here for this. She could have just done a cremation. This is ridiculous." Jennifer agreed. She said, "This is so embarrassing. Did you see that funeral home? It looked like a strip mall. I know Eleanor didn't have any money, but Sarah could have asked David to help pay for something nicer." Craig laughed. He said, "Sarah doesn't ask David for anything. She just takes." Patricia said, "Well, at least now maybe this will be over. Maybe Sarah can stop begging David for gas money. Maybe she'll stop using her dying mother as an excuse." Jennifer said, "Do you think Eleanor even had life insurance? I doubt it. Immigrants from that generation never planned ahead." Craig said, "I'd be shocked if there's anything in the estate. She probably died broke. Watch, within a month Sarah's going to come to us asking for a loan." Patricia laughed. She said, "Over my dead body. David has already supported that woman for 28 years. At some point she needs to stand on her own 2 feet." Jennifer said she has no idea how to manage money. She's 52 years old. What's she going to do, start a new career? Craig said, "I give it 6 months before she's asking us to bail her out." David Morrison stood there. His wife was 30 feet away burying her mother, and he said nothing. He just nodded along, sometimes smiled, once checked his watch. Linda Torres heard all of it. She was shaking with anger, but she didn't cause a scene. She'd remember every word. And she wasn't the only one listening. Robert Chang was there too, standing near a black Mercedes. He'd been watching, waiting, following Eleanor's instructions. "Don't tell Sarah anything until after the funeral. Let her grieve. But after the service, you find her. You tell her everything. And make sure her husband is standing right there when you do." Robert had wondered why Eleanor wanted it this way. But now, listening to this family mock a grieving woman, Robert understood perfectly. Eleanor had known exactly what kind of people they were, had wanted Sarah to see it, so that when Robert revealed the truth, Sarah would understand why Eleanor had structured things the way she had. Eleanor had been protecting her daughter, giving her the tools to finally break free. Robert waited until the last shovel of dirt had been placed, waited until most mourners had left, waited until Sarah was standing alone, and then he walked over. Sarah didn't notice Robert approaching. She was crying too hard. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. He said, "Mrs. Morrison." Sarah turned, saw a man in a gray suit holding a briefcase. She wiped her eyes, said yes. Robert introduced himself. He said, "My name is Robert Chang. I was your mother's attorney. I'm very sorry for your loss. Eleanor was an extraordinary woman." Sarah managed a small smile, said thank you. She assumed he was there about paperwork. She said, "If there are documents I need to sign, we can meet next week." Robert nodded. "But he said, actually, your mother left very specific instructions that I speak with you today. Here, now, and she requested that your husband be present." Sarah was confused. Why would David need to be there? Robert said, "Shall I ask him to join us?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. If her mother had wanted David there, she'd honor that. Robert walked over to the Morrisons. Their laughter died. He was polite but firm. He said, "Mr. Morrison, I'm Robert Chang, Eleanor Chen's estate attorney. I need to speak with you and your wife about Mrs. Chen's estate. Would you mind joining us?" David looked annoyed. He said, "Can't this wait? We were just leaving." Robert said, "I'm afraid not. Mrs. Chen's instructions were extremely clear. This needs to happen now." Patricia spoke up. She said, "What estate?" Eleanor cleaned houses. What could she possibly have? Robert didn't answer. Just looked at David and waited. David sighed, said, "Fine. Let's get this over with." He walked over. Patricia, Jennifer, and Craig followed, uninvited but curious. Robert didn't object. Robert opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick folder of documents. He looked at Sarah. His expression was kind but serious. He said, "Mrs. Morrison, before I begin, I need you to understand something. Everything your mother did, she did because she loved you. Every decision was about protecting you, about giving you options, about making sure you'd never have to depend on anyone who didn't value you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "I know she loved me." Robert nodded. He said, "Good. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to be shocking. It's going to change your life. Your mother first came to me in 2001. She'd already begun acquiring real estate. Over the following 23 years, I helped her build what I can only describe as a remarkable portfolio." Sarah said, "What portfolio?" "My mother cleaned houses. She lived in a tiny house. She drove a 15-year-old car. She clipped coupons." Robert said, "Your mother was one of the most financially disciplined people I have ever encountered. She lived far below her means so that she could invest everything else. She started with a duplex in 1983, then another property, then another. By the time she passed away, she owned 23 properties." Sarah couldn't process this. David spoke up, impatient. He said, "Okay, so she had some rental houses, probably worth $100,000 each, so a few $100,000 total. That'll help Sarah pay off the funeral expenses. Can we go now?" Robert looked at David, saw a man who was about to have his worldview shattered. He said, "Mr. Morrison, you're incorrect. Substantially incorrect. Eleanor Chen owned 23 properties across Northern California with a combined appraised value of over $43 million. The silence was absolute. Sarah's mouth fell open. David went pale. Patricia gasped. Jennifer stumbled backward. Craig said, "What?" Robert continued, calm and professional. He said, 6 4-unit apartment buildings, 3 commercial properties, 2 industrial warehouses, 8 single-family rental homes, 4 vacant lots. In addition, Mrs. Chen had a stock portfolio valued at $7.1 million, bonds worth $2.3 million, cash assets of $1.9 million. The total estate is valued at $47.3 million. And Mrs. Chen has left all of it, every single asset, solely to her daughter Sarah." The words hung in the air. $47.3 million. Sarah couldn't make sense of it. Her mother had been worth $47 million. It was impossible. She said, "I don't understand how." Robert was patient. He said, "Your mother was incredibly smart with money. She bought properties in areas she knew would appreciate. She paid cash. She managed everything herself. She reinvested every dollar, and she did this for 43 years. Compound growth creates exactly this result." Sarah said, "But she never told me. She lived like she was poor." Robert said, "She lived frugally because that's what allowed her to build wealth. And she didn't tell you because she wanted you to build your own life first, your own strength. She didn't want money to define you. She wanted you to define yourself. And then when you were ready, she wanted you to have the freedom that wealth provides." Sarah was crying again. Different tears now. Gratitude, love for a mother who'd thought of everything. David found his voice. Strangled, desperate, he said, "Wait, what do you mean solely to her? We're married. California is a community property state. Half of that is mine." Robert turned to him, expression neutral but eyes hard. He said, "Mr. Morrison, with respect, you're incorrect. Inheritance is separate property under California law unless the recipient chooses to commingle it." Mrs. Chen was very clear. "These assets remain separate. They belong to Sarah alone. You have no legal claim." David's face turned red. He said, "That's insane. We've been married 28 years. I've supported her. This should be marital property." Robert said, "Inheritance is explicitly exempt from community property laws. This is basic family law. Unless Sarah voluntarily chooses to commingle these assets, which I would strongly advise against, they remain hers alone. The will is airtight. There is no ambiguity." Patricia stepped forward, voice sharp. She said, "There must be some mistake. Eleanor cleaned houses. She couldn't possibly have $47 million. Robert pulled out documents, property deeds, appraisals. He said, "I have complete documentation, title transfers, purchase records, appraisal reports, tax return. There is no mistake. Your mother-in-law was extraordinarily successful. She was just very private." Jennifer said, "This doesn't make sense. Why would she hide this from Sarah?" Robert said, "Because Eleanor understood something important. Money changes relationships. She wanted Sarah to know who really cared about her before wealth became a factor. She wanted to protect Sarah from people who might try to take advantage of her. Jennifer's face flushed. The implication was clear. Craig said this is ridiculous. Sarah probably manipulated her. This will should be contested. Robert's expression hardened. He said, I would very strongly advise against that. Mrs. Chen's will was drafted 23 years ago and updated regularly. She was of sound mind at every update. I have documentation proving her competency. This will was created specifically to be uncontestable. Any attempt to challenge it will fail spectacularly. And the legal fees would be substantial enough to bankrupt most families. Is that really a path you want to pursue? Craig went quiet. Patricia's jaw was clenched. Jennifer looked slapped. And David just stood there watching his worldview collapse. The wife he'd controlled for 28 years. The wife he'd given an allowance to. The wife his family had mocked and treated like help. That wife was now worth $47 million, and he had no claim to any of it. Sarah stood trying to process everything. Her mother had been wealthy, had built an empire, had hidden it to protect Sarah, had waited until after her death so Sarah would never feel obligated to share. It was the most profound act of love Sarah had ever experienced. Robert said, Mrs. Morrison, we should discuss next steps. You'll need financial advisors, estate planners, tax attorneys, but that can wait. For now, I just need you to know that your mother's affairs are in perfect order. Everything is documented, everything is legal, everything is yours. Sarah whispered, I can't believe she did this. Robert smiled. He said, believe it. Your mother spent 43 years building this for you. She was meticulous, she was brilliant, and she loved you more than anything. Sarah looked at the grave, whispered, thank you, Mom, thank you for everything. Sarah stands up, 58, 00-6700. Patricia couldn't stay quiet. Her voice shrill, desperate. She said, David, you can't let this happen. That money should be family money. You've been married 28 years. You've supported her. You deserve half. David snapped out of his shock. He said, she's right. Sarah, we need to talk about this. We need to structure this properly. Put it in a family trust. This is too much money for you to manage alone. You don't know anything about investments. You'll need my help. Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw him clearly for the first time in 28 years. Saw the manipulation, the control, the assumption that she was incapable, and something inside her shifted, something fundamental. She said no. The word came out quiet but firm. No. David blinked. He said, what? Sarah said it again. Louder, no, I don't need your help. I don't need a family trust. I don't need you to manage anything. This is mine. My mother left it to me. Not to us, to me. David's expression shifted to anger. He said, Sarah, be reasonable. This is huge. You've never handled finances. You need me. Sarah felt something rising in her chest, something that felt like freedom. She said, I've never handled finances because you never let me. You took control of every dollar I earned. You gave me an allowance like I was a child. You made me ask permission to buy groceries, not because I was incapable, because you wanted control. David said, I was protecting you. Protecting us. Sarah said, you were financially secure. I was financially dependent. There's a difference. Patricia interjected, voice sharp. She said, Sarah, you're being very emotional, very irrational. You've just buried your mother. You're in shock. Once you've had time to process, you'll realize David is right. You need help. You need family support. Sarah turned to Patricia, looked at the woman who treated her like help for 28 years. Sarah said, with respect, Patricia, you are not my family. You've made that very clear for 28 years. My mother was my family. And she made sure I'd never have to ask you for anything ever again. Jennifer gasped, said, how dare you speak to my mother that way? Sarah said, the same way she's spoken to me for nearly 3 decades. The same way you've spoken about my mother at her funeral. Yes, I heard you. I heard all of you, talking about how embarrassing this funeral home is. How my mother probably died broke. How I'd be begging you for money within 6 months. You stood 20 feet from her grave and mocked her. Mocked me. So forgive me if I don't value your opinion. The Morrisons stood stunned. No one had ever heard Sarah speak like this. For 28 years she'd been quiet, accommodating, apologetic. This was someone new, someone they didn't recognize. Linda Torres, still nearby, smiled. This was the Sarah she remembered. Robert Chang was professionally impassive but internally proud. Eleanor had been right. David tried a different approach, voice softer, pleading. He said, Sarah, honey, I know you're upset. I know this has been difficult, but we're married, we're partners. We've built a life together. This money is a blessing for both of us. We can finally do all the things we've talked about. Sarah said, the life you've always wanted. David said, our life. Sarah said, when have you ever asked me what I wanted? You've spent 28 years telling me what we're doing, where we're going, how we're spending your money. You've controlled everything. David said, because I was taking care of us. Sarah said, no. You were taking care of yourself and making sure I had no choice but to stay. Robert cleared his throat, said, perhaps this conversation would be better in private. Patricia said, I agree. Sarah, come home with us. We'll have dinner, talk this through rationally. Sarah almost laughed. After everything they'd said, they expected her to come have dinner with them. She said, I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm going home. My home. The apartment I'm renting starting next week, not David's house. My home. David said, what apartment? Sarah felt satisfaction. She said, I'm moving out. I've already rented an apartment. One of my apartments, actually. I'm moving in next weekend, and I'm filing for separation the week after. The words hung in the air. David went white. Patricia made a strangled sound. Jennifer said, you can't be serious. Sarah said, I've never been more serious. Craig said, you're throwing away 28 years over money. That's shallow. Sarah said, I'm not leaving because of money. I'm leaving because for 28 years I've been made to feel worthless. I've been controlled, diminished, mocked. My mother's inheritance didn't change who I am. It just gave me the freedom to finally admit what I've known for a long time. I deserve better than this. Robert said, Mrs. Morrison, if I might suggest, my office can recommend excellent family law attorneys, people who specialize in protecting inherited assets during divorce. California law is very clear that inheritance remains separate property, but it's wise to have proper representation. David exploded. Voice loud, angry, he said, you are not divorcing me. You are not taking this money and walking away. I've given you 28 years. I've supported you. Given you a home. Everything you have is because of me. Sarah said quietly, everything I have is because my mother worked herself to death while you complained about her taking up my time. Everything I am is despite you, not because of you. And I'm done. I'm done apologizing for existing. I'm done asking permission. I'm done being made to feel small. I'm done with all of you. Patricia said, David, do something. David moved toward Sarah. Robert stepped between them, smooth but firm. He said, Mr. Morrison, I wouldn't, not here, not now. David stopped. Sarah said, I'll have my things out by the end of the week. You can keep the house, David. It's worth about $680,000. My inheritance is worth $47 million. I think I'll be just fine. She turned to Robert, said, can we schedule a meeting tomorrow? Robert said, of course. Sarah nodded, took one last look at her mother's grave, said quietly, I'll make you proud, Mom, I promise. Then she walked away, left them standing there, mouths open, furious, powerless. For the first time in 28 years, Sarah Morrison walked away without apologizing, without asking permission, without looking. Sarah drove home in a daze. Her hands were shaking. She'd just done something impossible. She stood up to David, to his family. She told them no. Part of her kept waiting to feel guilty, but that feeling never came. Instead, she felt lighter. She pulled into the driveway, sat in the car, then got out. When inside, the house was quiet. David was probably still at the cemetery. Sarah didn't care. She went to the bedroom, started pulling out suitcases. She said she'd be out by the end of the week, but she saw no reason to wait. She could stay in a hotel until the apartment was ready. She packed methodically. Clothes, toiletries, personal items, photos of her parents, her mother's jewelry box, books. It didn't take long. Most things were David's. Sarah realized she didn't own much. She was finishing when she heard the front door. David's footsteps, heavy, angry. He appeared in the doorway, face red, eyes hard. He said, what the hell do you think you're doing? Sarah said, I told you, I'm leaving. David said, you're not going anywhere. Sarah continued packing, said, yes, I am. We're done. The marriage is over. David moved into the room. His presence felt threatening. He said, you think you can just walk away, take millions and leave me with nothing? Sarah said, you're not getting nothing. You're keeping this house, the cars, the retirement account, everything we actually accumulated. You're just not getting my inheritance. That was never yours." David laughed, bitter. He said, "A week ago you were nobody. You worked a receptionist job making $40,000 a year. You drove a 10-year-old Honda. Now you think you're a queen because your mother happened to have money." Sarah stopped, turned to face him, said, "I never thought I was better than you, David. I spent 28 years thinking I wasn't good enough, that I needed your approval, your family's acceptance. I was wrong. I was always good enough. You just convinced me I wasn't so you could control me." David said, "I never controlled you." Sarah said, "You controlled every aspect of my life. My money, my time, my decisions. You made me ask permission for everything." David said, "Because you couldn't manage. Look at you. You're making terrible decisions, walking away from a marriage, refusing help with an inheritance you have no idea how to manage. You're going to lose everything, and I won't be there to save you." Sarah felt that old fear try to take hold. But then she remembered her mother, Eleanor Chen, who arrived in America with nothing, who'd built 47 million while working 2 jobs and raising a child, who'd been brilliant and capable and strong. Sarah had Eleanor's DNA, Eleanor's example, Eleanor's legacy. She said, "My mother managed just fine without a man controlling her. I think I'll manage too." David said, "Your mother was different." Sarah said, "You're right. She was stronger than I am. But I'm learning, and I have her entire estate as proof that women in my family don't need men to take care of us. We take care of ourselves." David's expression shifted. Desperation. He said, "Sarah, please, don't do this. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. I know I haven't always been perfect. I know my family can be difficult, but we've been together 28 years. That has to mean something." Sarah felt sadness, not regret, just sadness for the years lost. She said, "It does mean something. It means I wasted 28 years with someone who never valued me. But I'm not wasting anymore. I'm 52. I have maybe 30 years left. I'm going to spend them being happy, being free, being myself, not who you needed me to be." David said, "You'll regret this. You'll realize you made a mistake and you'll come back and I won't take you back." Sarah smiled, said, "I'm counting on it." She picked up her suitcases, walked past him, down the stairs, out the door, put them in her car, went back for another load. David followed, still pleading, still angry, still convinced she'd change her mind. Sarah ignored him. Made 3 trips, got everything, stood in the driveway looking at the house one last time. David stood on the porch. He said, "This is really it." Sarah said, "This is how things ended the day you stood by while your family mocked me at my mother's funeral. I'm just making it official." She got in her car, started the engine, drove away, didn't look back. Sarah checked into a hotel that night. A nice one, comfortable. She ordered dinner, salmon and asparagus and wine, ate it slowly, went to bed at 9, slept better than she had in years. The next morning she met with Robert Chang. He'd assembled a team. Financial advisor Margaret Kelly, tax attorney James Ruiz, family law specialist Lisa Hernandez. They spent 4 hours going over everything. Margaret explained investment strategies. With conservative management, the estate would generate approximately $2 million a year in passive income, more than Sarah had made in her entire working life. James explained tax planning, estate planning, charitable giving strategies. Lisa explained divorce law, how to document everything, what to expect from David's attorneys. Sarah listened, asked questions, took notes. She felt overwhelmed but not incapable. This was learnable. By the end, they'd created a plan. Establish a revocable living trust, transfer all assets into the trust, hire professional property management, diversify the portfolio, file for legal separation within the week. Lisa would handle all proceedings. They'd document everything meticulously. Sarah signed papers, authorized transfers, set up new bank accounts at a different bank, accounts David had no access to. For the first time in 28 years, Sarah had complete financial independence. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was freedom. Over the next weeks, Sarah moved into her apartment. Beautiful, high ceilings, hardwood floors, big windows. She furnished it slowly. Chose things she liked, not things David would approve of, not things that would impress Patricia, things that made Sarah happy. Comfortable couch, bookshelves, art from local artists, plants, everything felt like hers. David tried calling. She didn't answer. He sent emails. She didn't respond. His attorney sent letters. Lisa handled them. Patricia showed up once. Sarah didn't let her in, said, "Whatever you have to say it to my attorney." Patricia left, furious but powerless. Jennifer sent a long social media message about how money changes people. Sarah blocked her. Craig tried connecting on professional sites. Sarah blocked him too. She cut them all off completely. Finally, Sarah started therapy, unpacked 28 years of conditioning, learning to recognize manipulation, learning to trust her judgment. She joined a gym, started taking care of her health. She took classes, cooking, art, photography. She made new friends, people who didn't know about the inheritance, people who liked her for who she was. She volunteered at organizations helping women escape abusive relationships, shared her story, offered support, found purpose in helping others find their strength. And slowly, day by day, Sarah built a life, a real life, not a life in service of someone else's expectations, a life that was fully, authentically hers. 6 months after her mother's funeral, the divorce was finalized. David got the house, both cars, half their retirement account, about $85,000. Sarah kept her entire inheritance, untouched, protected. David tried one last manipulation. His attorney filed a motion for spousal support. The judge took 15 minutes to deny it, looked at David's attorney and said, "Your client controlled all marital finances for 28 years, gave his wife an allowance, made her ask permission, and now he wants her to pay him." Motion denied. David didn't appeal. He knew he'd lost. 3 years have passed since that day at the cemetery. Sarah is 55 years old. She lives in a beautiful home overlooking the American River. Not a mansion, just a comfortable house with space for her books and art and garden. She sold several properties, reinvested in a diversified portfolio. Her net worth has grown to approximately $58 million. She lives comfortably but not extravagantly. She volunteers regularly at women's shelters, at immigrant support organizations. She established the Eleanor Chen Foundation in 2025, a nonprofit providing microloans to immigrant women starting businesses, offering financial literacy education, helping women escape financially abusive relationships. The foundation has helped over 150 women, given out over $2 million in loans and grants, created opportunities for women who would never have had them. Sarah serves on the board, participates in programs, shares her story. She's become an advocate for financial independence, for women recognizing their worth, for people understanding it's never too late to change your life. She's also found love again. Met a man named Michael, a widower, a retired teacher, someone kind and gentle who treats her as an equal, who encourages her independence, who celebrates her success. They've been together 18 months, talk about getting married someday, but there's no rush. They're happy. Sarah has learned that happiness doesn't come from rushing toward what you think you should want. It comes from being present with what you actually have. She thinks about her mother every day, wishes Eleanor could see the life she's built, wishes she could thank her one more time. But Sarah believes her mother knows, believes Eleanor is somewhere watching, proud of the daughter who finally found the strength Eleanor always knew was there. David Morrison is 55. He remarried in 2025. His new wife, Amanda, is a pharmaceutical sales rep. They live in a modest townhouse in Roseville. He works for his brother-in-law's insurance company, makes about $70,000 a year, comfortable but not wealthy, not the lifestyle he'd had with Sarah, not the lifestyle he'd expected when he learned about her inheritance. He's bitter, still, 3 years later. Still tells people his ex-wife stole millions that should have been his. His current wife doesn't know the full story. David told her a version where Sarah was greedy, manipulative. Amanda believes him for now, but she's starting to notice patterns. The way David controls their finances, the way he questions her purchases. Give it a few more years, she'll figure it out. Patricia Morrison is 70. She was audited by the IRS in 2025. That cash payment she'd made to David in 2018, $65,000 to pay off his business debt without reporting it as a gift. The IRS considered that a violation. She had to pay $47,000 in back taxes and penalties, lost her position on several charity boards, lost her standing in the country club social hierarchy. She blames Sarah, tells people Sarah vindictively reported her. This isn't true. The audit was random, had nothing to do with Sarah. But Patricia needs someone to blame. Patricia and Sarah haven't spoken in 3 years. Sarah is fine with that. Jennifer Morrison is 51, still married to Craig, still living off his income, still posting on social media about her perfect life. But she had to delete all her old posts about Sarah. Too many people called her out. Too many people who knew the real story commented about how Jennifer had mocked Sarah for years, how she treated Sarah terribly, how karma had caught up. Jennifer tried to maintain the moral high ground, but too many witnesses came forward. Eventually, Jennifer just deleted everything and went quiet. She and Sarah are not in contact, will never be. Sarah is fine with that too. Linda Torres is 76, still sharp, still active, still Sarah's friend. They have lunch once a month, talk about Eleanor, about life, about how things change when you least expect it. Linda gave a statement during the divorce, testified about what she'd heard at the funeral, about the Morrison family's cruelty. Her testimony helped establish the pattern of abuse, helped make sure Sarah kept her inheritance. Linda says it was the easiest testimony she's ever given. She was just telling the truth. She's proud of Sarah, tells everyone about her friend who escaped an abusive marriage and built a whole new life, who took her mother's legacy and turned it into something beautiful. Robert Chang is 64, still practicing law, still helping clients with estate planning. He considers Sarah's case one of the most satisfying of his career, not because of the money, because he got to see Eleanor's plan work exactly as intended, got to see a woman escape and thrive. He and Sarah stay in touch. She sends him a Christmas card every year, thanks him for everything, for following Eleanor's instructions perfectly, for helping Sarah protect her inheritance, for being kind when she needed it. Robert keeps those cards in his office, reminders that sometimes the law can protect people who need it, sometimes justice actually happens. This story isn't just about money. Yes, Sarah inherited $47 million. Yes, that gave her options most people don't have, but the money wasn't what saved her. The strength was already there. The inheritance just gave her permission to use it. Sarah could have accepted David's argument, could have put the money in a joint trust, could have stayed in the marriage and used the wealth to make her life easier. Some people would have made that choice. Decided that financial security within the marriage was better than uncertainty alone. Sarah didn't do that. Even with $47 million, she chose freedom over security, chose herself over comfort, chose the unknown over the familiar prison. That's courage. That's the kind of strength her mother had been building in her all along. Eleanor Chen knew what she was doing. Every envelope of cash she slipped to Sarah, every time she asked if Sarah was happy, every decision she made about the inheritance. Eleanor was preparing her daughter, not just financially, emotionally. She was showing Sarah that women can build wealth, can manage money, can be independent. She was creating a safety net but also creating an example, and Eleanor timed it perfectly. She didn't tell Sarah about the money while she was alive, didn't give Sarah access to wealth while she was still in survival mode, still conditioned to ask permission, still afraid to make waves. She waited until after her death. Until Sarah had reached the absolute bottom, until Sarah had been humiliated at her mother's funeral, until there was nothing left to lose. Because Eleanor understood that people don't change until they're ready, don't leave until they've reached their breaking point. And sometimes they need resources to make that break. Eleanor gave Sarah both, the breaking point, the resources, the perfect storm that made change inevitable. This is a story about generational sacrifice, about an immigrant woman who worked herself to exhaustion so her daughter could have choices, about a mother who loved her child enough to stay silent about wealth, to let her daughter struggle, to wait until the exact right moment to reveal the truth. It's about what real love looks like, not control disguised as care, not manipulation disguised as protection. Real love, the kind that says, I will give you the tools you need, I will trust you to use them. I will believe in your strength even when you don't believe in it yourself. It's also a story about what happens when quiet people finally find their voice. Sarah was quiet for 28 years, accommodating, apologetic, easy to overlook, easy to control. And then one day she said no, Just that one word, no, and everything changed. Because people who try to control you can only do it if you let them. The moment you stop asking permission, stop apologizing, stop making yourself smaller, they lose their power. They can rage, they can threaten, they can try to make you feel guilty. But if you hold firm, if you remember your own worth, they can't actually stop you. David couldn't stop Sarah from leaving. Patricia couldn't shame her into staying. Jennifer couldn't manipulate her into sharing. Craig couldn't intimidate her into backing down. Because Sarah finally understood what her mother had been trying to teach her all along. She didn't need any of them. She never had. She'd just been convinced that she did. This story is for everyone who's ever felt powerless, who's ever stayed in a situation that hurt them because they couldn't see a way out, who's ever been made to feel like they should be grateful for crumbs when they deserve the whole meal. You're stronger than you know. You have more options than you think. And sometimes, the life you're meant to live is waiting on the other side of the word no. Sarah Mitchell said no to a marriage that diminished her, no to a family that mocked her, no to a life spent asking permission to exist, and she walked into a future that was completely, entirely, beautifully her own. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever been made to feel small by people who thought they were better than you? Have you ever stayed somewhere with someone in some situation because you couldn't see the way out? What did you do about it? Are you still there? Or did you find your own way to say no? Leave your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if this resonated, if it made you think about your own life, your own choices, your own worth. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's being controlled or diminished or made to feel like they don't have options, share this with them. Let them see what's possible when you finally choose yourself. Because sometimes we all need a reminder that it's never too late, that we're never too old, that we're never too trapped, that there's always a way forward if we're brave enough to take it. Thanks for watching. If you stayed all the way to the end of this 100-minute journey, I appreciate you more than you know. If you want more stories like this, real stories about justice and courage and people getting exactly what they deserve, subscribe. Hit that bell, because I've got plenty more where this came from. Until next time, remember this. You're stronger than you know. You're worth more than anyone who makes you feel small. And sometimes the best inheritance isn't money. It's the belief that you deserve to be free.